Every woman needs to take that universal path to find self-worth, a voice, and a cherished life. That path is the heroine's journey, the roadmap to an amazing adventure that women travel to discover their true selves. The heroine's journey is not about getting on your superpowers and going out to fight the lions, tigers, and bears of the outside world with your might. That would be the hero's journey. This woman's journey is the internal journey that a woman takes to grow her courage and strength and travel to her best life.
Heroines, so glad you're here. And I've got exciting news. The Heroine's Journey book is out and for you. It's going to show you how your life can move along so beautifully and gracefully. Go get the book now at heroinesbook.com. Journey onward.
Good morning, Joan.
Good morning, Erin. So fun to meet on these calls.
I know.
And I'm so delighted that so many people are now watching our podcast. You know, when we started it, I just couldn't imagine it. It's been quite a while, as you know, the new book has gotten written and our podcast has gotten underway. And, you know, I think there's some people out there who want to become heroines.
I think there might be. Can you show your book a little bit more? I'm just so excited that the hardbound is like right there. Is so cool. Pull it over a little bit. Yeah, right there. It's so cool.
It's missing at this point is that it has become international bestseller. That's very exciting. We were first on Amazon in women in business, in transition and self-help. So it's just very exciting that the book is taking off the way it has. This has been a labor of love for me for 10 years. And, you know, I don't think we've really thought about being heroines in our own lives, but as we talk about it, you know, more and more women are stepping up and saying, oh my gosh, you know, I don't want to be a victim. I really want to develop the inner strength, the courage, so much that we talk about, the self-worth, so that I can live a life I love. And I know this was true for me. I found myself, you know, in a messy situation that was not the life I love. And the other day, as I was walking down the street, I was just thinking how much better my life has gotten. And it's gotten there because of everything that we write about in the Heroine's Journey, we talk about on the podcast. It's just, it's not stuff that my mother, you know, my second grade teacher, you know, those people who I look to in my life had taught me. So we're really proud to deliver this work and talk about the heroine.
Well, what's so crazy to me in talking about the heroine's journey and the heroine is it feels like it's this brand new concept, and it shouldn't be. Like, women have been around as long as men. Like, why is it that the heroine or the heroine's journey is like this revelation suddenly? Because I know, like, I've heard forever, and I work in production, I work in entertainment. Obviously, we always talk about the hero's journey and how would the story be told in the hero's journey. Why is this such a revelation?
Yeah, and why, when you look around as you've grown up, why haven't you read stories about amazing heroines or seen amazing women show their courage and strength, and more importantly, their transformation?
Yeah.
You know, why isn't there any mythology? You know, as you mentioned, Joseph Campbell, who was the creator of the hero's journey, when he put together that work, he went back and he read about mythology and stories and movies and all kinds of literature and production that actually told of the journey that a man takes. But where are those for women?
I know. Well, and I was doing a little research on that because we were going to talk about this. And it's crazy to me, but he actually like admits it. He agrees. There's literally a quote here from him that says, I don't know what the counterpart would be in the women's case. There is a feminine counterpart to the trials and the difficulties, but it certainly is in a different mode. I don't know the counterpart, the real counterpart, not the women pretending to be male, but the normal feminine archetypological,
that's a hard word.
that one right there, of this experience. I wouldn't know what that would be. Women will have to tell us the way a woman experiences the journey, if it is the same journey.
And isn't that amazing? you know? So here we are to tell. We want to stand at the top of the mountain and tell. And it's amazing that he could go back to literature, to mythology, to the Bible, to all kinds of sources that gave him the puzzle pieces to what the journey for a man is. And let's be clear that the journey, whether it's the hero or the heroine's journey, is to your best self. It's
Yes.
to the maturity, the growth, let's call it the soul's growth of becoming our best selves here on the planet. So, are we to say that only men become their best selves and women don't have any part in that process?
I think we've sort of been saying that until recently.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Or saying that the journey is the same regardless.
And the journey for a man was told in things like The Hobbit and Star Wars and many things that our male counterparts could look to and say, oh, okay, that's the journey of my life. What it essentially is a plot line that men go through in life, and everybody's story varies. That's, the same plot line in Star Wars or The Hobbit. It's just that the journeys vary, the stories vary. So, do we not have a plot line that takes us to our maturity? Do we not have stories that we can look to and say, oh my gosh, that was part of my transformational growth?
Well, I
Apparently not.
but I think we do. We just haven't shared it.
Hmm.
We haven't been telling these stories out loud. And what's crazy to me as well is that we haven't been telling those stories to each other even
No.
until kind of recently.
It was like, when was the last time you went to lunch with your best friend and said, hey, I heard this amazing story about this amazing woman, who had maybe hard times, but as we've watched her, she's grown and she's developed and she's become something much bigger and prouder for herself than when she started. I think we kind of got that, at least with Oprah in her initial years, and we
Yeah.
saw how much struggle she went through. But did we point to her as a heroine?
No, I don't think that we properly celebrated what Oprah accomplished. Like we look at what she's accomplished from a monetary perspective, from an
Uh-huh.
ownership perspective, but I don't think that we gave her due in terms of her path of transformation.
Yes. Yes. I mean, look at it this way. When was the last time you drove down the street and there was a monument to a woman?
Like,
Like, what is success for a woman? Another person I think definitely was a heroine, but we didn't celebrate her that way, was Marilyn Monroe. What we remember for her for is her good looks and her body,
yeah,
and the fact that most men wanted her.
she was
And
the epitome of the bombshell.
of the bombshell, even the way she so gracefully walked. But, you know, she was an amazing woman. I have a quote that is beside my desk that said, everything happens for a reason. Sometimes good things fall apart so better things can come together.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you pull up Marilyn Monroe. When I was younger, like probably in my teens or 20s, like I was just fascinated with Marilyn Monroe because she was such the dichotomy of um, the blonde bombshell, like the epitome of the blonde bombshell. But on the other side, she was also really like she loved to learn, she loved to read, she loved
Uh-huh.
those more quiet pursuits that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of in association with her.
Uh-huh.
And actually, probably one of my favorite images of her is her hair's a little messy. She's in a bathrobe, a white bathrobe, and just kind of looking out of a window and waving. It's not made up. It's not your
Uh-huh.
bombshell typical book, but it feels like her soul is coming through that picture.
Because you were remembering her for her reality, not for something that was made up and projected about her.
Yeah.
But, what do we remember women for?
their looks.
And do we remember them for specific things they did? You know,
Not generally.
I think the only time that I can really say that to be true is, with maybe in healthcare, where women have had outstanding roles in a service that they provided. But again, that's not about them and their transformation and who they really are.
It's
That's
about their
about,
service to
yeah.
essentially in the wartime.
hmm hmm And we
Yeah.
clearly know, which is the basis of the first chapter of the book, that when asked, Joseph Campbell clearly said,
I don't know.
when asked, do women have a heroine's journey or the equivalent of a heroine's journey? And as the quote you just read, he said, I don't know. But he also said, no, they don't. They stay home and cry.
Yeah. Well, I have to hope, I hope that this quote that I just read is a little bit later than his stay home and cry quote, because at least he acknowledges here that
That he doesn't know.
that he doesn't know, which
Uh-huh.
honestly is massive. Even
Uh-huh.
just to get somebody to acknowledge, I don't know.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And the question I have is, whose problem is this? Is it ours as women because we haven't told stories to one another about the brilliance and about the accomplishments and about the transformations that women go through?
I think it's a little bit on both sides. I mean, it's certainly like us not having told the stories, not carrying the torch forward, so to speak. But there's also a huge deficit in terms of receptivity of those stories as well.
Absolutely. Uh-huh. History's called history for a reason and not herstory, because the recording of our accomplishments and the acknowledgement, just on a simple level. I started the local Rotary Club, and it was the most phenomenal thing that anybody had ever seen. I mean, I got Thomas Kincaid to paint a picture for the club. It turned out to be just really a big splash. Today, they don't really remember me for starting it.
Really, but they
Yeah,
remember the things that like Thomas Kincaid or whatever.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. Exactly. So is it this kind of culture we can change? Because I make the statement that this is really important. This is really important because if you can look at the plot line of your life and say, "Oh, this is where I am in it," you have help to go forward, particularly if you've hit the rough, rocky spot of the heroine's journey.
Yeah. Well, if you eliminate 50% of the stories, you know, this is something that I see and talk about a lot in on the production side or on the film and TV side. It's the representation, like seeing your stories represented by other people, whether that's on screen or whether that's just in your life around you or in books. It's hugely important for your sense of yourself and
Uh-huh,
your sense of where you could potentially go to.
uh-huh. And the question I've asked over and over at the college that I went to is, what is success for a woman? Because we look to that acknowledgement and that clarification to measure our successful path. And yet, getting outside, let's call it validation for that, is really a difficult thing.
Yeah.
When you get to be 80 years old and you look back on your life and you say, was I successful? Well, we know what it is for a man to be successful. He goes and fights the lions, tigers, and bears, and he brings back the bacon. And he gets a gold star right in the middle of his forehead. And if he contributes it to something like a college or other thing, he gets big accolades for it. But as a woman, when we look back and say, at 80, are we successful? What's made us successful? I think we don't know, and I think that severely harms our self-worth. Heroines, thanks for being with me. There's a really big idea that I want to tell you about, and that's the heroine's journey. Are you like worried or concerned about your life? I was. Has something big come along and just rocked you? Maybe thrown your apple cart straight up in the air. And when you ask yourself, are you really living the life of joy, prosperity, and freedom that you want to live? You know, life is for us to enjoy, not for us to suffer through. And that's what the heroine's journey is all about. It's your roadmap to a life that you love. You can have it. It's at theheroinesbook.com. I've written it for you. I can't wait for you to read it. And I'd love you to give me your feedback.
So what would you, or how would you define success for a woman?
I think that's in the process of maturing. I think it's a new question that hasn't been asked wildly. And I think that we first have to point to some people that we think have been successful and acknowledge where those things are. For instance, a woman staying home and raising great kids, you got to call that successful. A woman who climbs to the top of the corporate ladder and maybe is the CEO or helps that corporation to grow and provide good things to people, you got to call that successful, you know? So there are so many different ways to look at it. In my view, I think one of the biggest initial points of success is claiming your self-worth.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily include acknowledgement from the outside. But once you claim your self-worth, you can use your voice. And then maybe you can make some changes.
Well, it's interesting. Like when you say that term, claiming your self-worth, what comes to mind for me immediately is valuing yourself, or knowing that you have a space in the room, like that you deserve to be there as much as anybody else in the room, and to be heard. And again, that can manifest in so many different ways, depending upon what you're doing and that kind of thing. But you have value in that room,
in that space.
Yeah, in that space.
And the heroine's journey, the way we define it, is the first step, which is represented in this new book, is create your stability. The next step is awaken your authenticity. And I promise you, you cannot be authentic until you get yourself established and create your stability. Because if you don't do that, you're always compromising because you need things.
Yeah.
Like you need to pay your rent, but you have to prostitute yourself sometimes to get what you need. So spending less than you earn and creating your stability is the first step, I think, in that success path. The next step is awakening your authenticity. There's a big difference between people you look at and you just know, like they're trying to put on a show or, whatever. And it doesn't ring true. So becoming authentic, being able to live your true life from your true perspective, that would be next. The success path in the heroine's journey after that is to light up your expression. Well, you can't light up your expression if you're not authentic and you haven't created your stability, because they build on each other. And your expression is being able to let loose of the gifts, the talents, the skills that you were blessed with when you came roaring down the birth canal. Because remember, you came roaring down the birth canal, fully approved with a lot to deliver. And then that leads to the fourth step, which is make your contribution. And you can't skip ahead. You can't make your contribution without building these internal things inside of yourself which help you become the heroine.
Do you feel like to become the heroine, you need to go through each of those steps, or just doing the process of it allows you to become the heroine, and therefore you just become more realized as you go?
Yeah, I think that's you can't skip to delivering your contribution, making your contribution, and miss the three before it, you know? And as we look at people again, heroines that you or I might identify in history, maybe that's Eleanor Roosevelt. We know she went through some really tough times. We know she had major transformation and character building and all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff that led her through the process. But when you look around, where's that story told, and how is she acknowledged, and you know is she successful?
I mean, I do believe that she was successful. She made a lot of change in the world. But you're right, like hearing that story and appreciating the change that she did make in the world, it's hard to find those details unless you're very specifically looking.
Yeah, and I call her a heroine, but do we all, and each one of us are going to have different heroines that we
Yeah.
maybe look to. But when I look to going through the difficulties in my own life and the changes that I've needed to make, it's really helpful to be able to say that woman was a heroine. Like I said about the quote that hangs
Mhm.
next to me about Marilyn Monroe, I get great inspiration out of that. She's imparting some wisdom to me. And
Yeah.
for us to be successful as women, I think we need to listen and look to that wisdom. But if we don't call them heroines, or we don't tell the stories between ourselves, then how do we know they're out there?
Well, I guess that is ultimately the question, right? Like, how do you find them? How do you hear their stories if their stories aren't being told? Or, you know,
Yeah, and I think like you're pointing out, it has to be purposeful.
yeah.
You have to pick a couple, you know. Maybe it was your grandmother, maybe it was, and you have to know their life. But let's be clear, Joseph Campbell was wrong. We have a heroine's path. It's different than the hero's path, but we have a heroine's path, which we should stand up from the rooftops and shout out loud, oh my God, we're heroines. Yay.
Yeah. Well, and it's so fascinating to me how easy it is to ignore that, or to forget, I guess probably is the better word, to forget that there is a journey, that there is a heroine in all of us, that we are all transforming and becoming, hopefully better aspects of ourselves.
It's a testimony to how how it gets shut down, how the stories aren't written, how the I mean, when was the last time you turned around to a friend and said, I just watched you do that, and that was really heroic on your part?
Yeah.
Like, you give me inspiration about what a heroine you are.
And I have to admit, sadly, that I I haven't done that recently. And you saying that out loud to me, honestly, makes I was literally, before we got on this call, I was literally just texting with a friend of mine who's having a tough time, and she's really struggling, and she's womaning up and, doing the hard things, and that would have been a perfect opportunity to
Uh-huh.
say, I see you, way to be
Uh-huh.
in your heroine, way to do the things that you need to do, the hard things,
Yes.
and appreciate that it's
Yes.
hard.
But if you said that to her, you're acclaiming her ability to claim her own strengths, claim her own courage, move on in her life, that she's going someplace, that she's not just the victim who's going to stay stuck in that place forever, and that you're going to cheer her on as she climbs her way out of this.
Yeah.
Because the
Yeah.
heroine's in process.
I like that. I think that's going to be my new phrase, a heroine in process.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not a rose garden. I mean, I've said this before, but my father said to me, save for a rainy day. And I'm like, I'm not having any rainy days. Well, that's the naivete that we come to,
Yeah.
when she finds herself in that difficult situation, she's beating herself up and shaming herself because she's not where she wants to be. She got knocked to the ground, or she's, her self-worth is way out of kilter, any number of things.
Mhm.
And for you to come along and call her a heroine, that she has this capacity, she has this ability, and that we're going to be cheerleaders of each other, not adversaries.
I feel like that's I mean, and this would be a very short episode if we just stopped it right now, but I feel like that is the message of this episode, which is to recognize, to acknowledge, to lift up the heroines in your life every day. Like every day you are around women who are doing amazing, extraordinary things, um,
Uh-huh.
challenging things, tough things, painful things.
Uh-huh.
And to say something as simple as, I see you, I love the heroine you
Amazing.
are becoming.
Exactly. And as you know, we're inviting different people and different women on the podcast who have been heroines, and we're telling their stories. This is a place where the heroine is acknowledged, and we hope that it's going to grow, and we're going to be telling the stories, being different to one another, and making, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, making heroine a concept.
Yes.
Okay. Making it a thing.
Yes. And I think that I literally am going to start every day, like
Uh-huh.
make one of my new goals for myself is every day for three, let's say five, let's go crazy. Let's say five women in my
Uh-huh.
life every day, and just recognize, actually see them and acknowledge like them.
Uh-huh. Because we want to help each other. The planet needs us. The planet needs us to claim our self-worth, to and if you don't see yourself as a heroine, you're not going to speak up where we need you to speak up.
Yeah.
Women, the best societies are the ones where women have a presence. I read a major book a long time ago that totally changed my life. It was called The Chalice and the Blade. It's an old book. I sat down on the beach with it and I couldn't put it down. And it traced herstory and not history. And while I love men and history is important for one half, there's this other whole half where women have played enormous roles as leaders in the arts and education and so much. And we want to highlight them for that.
Yes. 100%. I am 100% behind you, Joan.
Because for so much of my early life, I thought of myself as the victim because I took, as everybody knows, I took a huge fall, you know, and the people who I love and trust are the ones who saw my bigger self. They were the ones who said, "Hey, Joan, you're much more capable of this. You have courage, you have strength." Like this one woman in my life, she said to me, "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." And I thought to myself, I don't consider myself a strong woman. I needed her to call it out
I was gonna
because,
say, did her saying that suddenly like turn the mirror and be like, oh, there you are.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I needed that because I frankly was in a pile of shit at that point, you know, and I needed that reframe in my perspective, let's call it. She didn't, she didn't call me a heroine specifically, but she called out my heroine capabilities and characteristics. And, you know, one way to control women in this world is to make them think that they're a victim.
Yeah.
And that's not what we want.
It doesn't serve anybody.
It doesn't. It really doesn't. We are remarkably capable, remarkably accomplished. The fact that the culture is not pointing that out to us, I think the first place to start is to point it out to each other.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I would even back that up one step and say the first place to start is to point it out to yourself. Like look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and be like, I see you.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the turning point of my life, was when I said, you don't really know who I am. Because I was saying to myself, I have much more courage and much more strength, and I'm more able. You haven't seen that yet, but stick around and you're going to see it. Because there's nothing stronger than a woman who stands in her strength, who
Very
is
true.
the heroine. We just haven't thought about it. It wasn't part of, my mother didn't say to me, grow up to be a heroine.
Yeah. I would assume that she probably said, or the path that you saw was sort of following your father's path of success, so to speak.
Uh-huh. And I think a point that we make is, particularly as we went into the workforce, we took a look around and we said, what works? The male path to success works. But as I've acknowledged, it works for a period of time and then it doesn't work. And then you're like, what path am I on? What do I do next? Because getting on that wrong path was not the path that was going to lead me to becoming the full, not just full in sense of blossoming into my best self, but into my happiness, into my joy, into my authenticity, into my, you know, thank you, God, that I'm living this life. When I worked on Wall Street and I was wearing clothes that looked like men, I was not saying thank you, that I look like a man. I was saying, what's wrong with this picture? What am I doing? I have this feminine spirit that I can't squash, to the point that when I worked on Wall Street, I would wear, all these man clothes, but really lovely, lacy underwear, because there was a woman in me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is also something, like we have tried in certain ways to invisible ourselves.
Uh-huh. No question about it. Yes. Yes. We put on a cloak to invisible. Well, that's a new word. We should
invisible ourselves.
invisible ourselves. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll trade you words. You could say the other word for me and I'll say this one for you.
Okay. And the point of it is that the second step that we talked about is awaken your authenticity. Let yourself be who you are.
Yeah.
And let yourself be strong and proud and capable as you move through your heroine's journey, because it's inevitable that you're going to have some difficulties. You know, there, it's not true that there are going to be no rainy days. There are. And we're here on the Heroine's Journey podcast because we want you to see that there's a path, that Joseph Campbell was wrong, that there is a path forward for women. It's not the path of the man. There's much discussion to be had around this and for us to talk to each other about, and encouraging that. Well, that's our mission.
Well, and telling our stories, so
Uh-huh.
that you can, if somebody asks you, who are the heroines in your life, you can say, oh yeah, automatically, I know this one, I know this one, I know this one.
I've done such crazy things as to stand in a line where there are a bunch of women around me and say, so who are the heroines in your life? And I test it because they look at me like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And if you're standing with me in that line, I might hand you a paperback and say, there's a new world out there.
It's an exciting new world.
It's an exciting new world, yes. So join us next week because we love to have this discussion with you. So please go to our Facebook page, write us a comment. We'd love to hear what you're thinking and have you join with us in this conversation that we're having. So till next week, journey onward.
That is this week's episode of The Heroine's Journey. You can access the blog post for this episode along with other great resources at walkthejourney.com. Also, get your free ebook at walkthejourney.com so you can say goodbye to just surviving and turn into thriving. Join us next week for another fun, inspiring, and uplifting episode. If you love this episode, feel free to subscribe and give us a review on iTunes. Stay in touch on other social media platforms, Instagram and our Facebook group, both at The Heroine's Journey LLC. Until next time.